right. So now we're recording. So welcome officially to the WSU Sustainability Speaker Series. We have Dr. Patricia Townsend and April Atwood here with us tonight to talk about the important upcoming date that we would like to move, which is Earth Overshoot Day. And Dr. Patricia Townsend works with us at WSU Extension, and Dr. April Atwood works at Seattle University, where she's a professor there. We're thrilled to have both of them here. And again, if you have any questions, you want to put it in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the program. And I'm looking forward to learning right along with you. And I suppose I should say who I am. I'm Heather Teagarden. I'm the program coordinator for the Sustainable Community Stewards. And I see a lot of our volunteers online here with us tonight. Thank you for being here. And if you're interested in becoming involved, we have our fall training coming up. We've moved the date back a little bit to a later start, but we'll be starting October 2nd. And if there's anyone involved here tonight that lives in the city of Shoreline, we're working with them on a customized training that will start September 15th. So get more information about that on our website. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to again welcome Patricia Townsend and April Atwood, and I'll let Patricia take over from here. You just need to unmute yourself.
Good evening, everyone. Now, can you hear me okay, Heather?
It's a little bit quiet, so.
It's a little bit quiet?
Oh, there's the better.
That's better? Okay, I'll move my microphone a little bit closer.
There you are.
Okay, sounds good now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining this evening. I appreciate you taking the time out to listen to what April and I have to say. This is our first time that April and I are collaborating together. I saw her speak at a conference a couple years ago, and thought she would be a great person to collaborate with at some point, and I came up with this idea to talk about Earth Overshoot Day. So I'm gonna share my screen. Everyone can see that? Looks good? Okay. All right, and okay. So as Heather mentioned, I am Patricia Townsend. I work at Washington State University. I've been there 8 years as of this summer. These webinar series that Heather and I started in the summer are funded by Snohomish County Solid Waste. And we are to teach about sustainability and help people find ways to reduce waste. And so I'm joined tonight by my colleague April Atwood from Seattle University. And as Heather mentioned, please feel free to type in questions into the chat box. I should be able to monitor that during the webinar. So Earth Overshoot Day is this Saturday, August 22nd, 2020. So coming up real soon. Earth Overshoot Day, it's not really a good thing. It's not something to celebrate like Earth Day. We had the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this past April, and it turns out Earth Overshoot Day is exactly 4 months from when we had the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So what Earth Overshoot Day is, it's the date where we have basically exhausted the resources that we need to live on Earth. So you can think of it as having an overdraft on your checkbook. Checkbooks are kind of antique things now, but you get the drift of spending more than you have. So as a whole, come this Saturday, we would have overspent our resources. So the move the date hashtag, the idea is that each year we do a little bit better. So that next year, the Earth Overshoot Day is on August 27th. In 2022, it's in September 1st. And someday when I'm an old lady, it's hopefully at the end of the year, which is what it should be. It should be December 31st. Or it should be, you know, we don't even use up all the resources that the Earth has within one calendar year. But right now we're using more than that. A lot of the graphics and information that I'm going to be sharing is from an organization called the Global Footprint Network. And they allow me to use their graphics and data freely as long as I give them credit for that. The other thing that I want to mention is a lot of the photographs that I'm using are from an organization called Unsplash. And so you'll have those resources at the end of the webinar. So this is a figure from Earth Overshoot Day. And if we think back to the first Earth Day in 1970, we were not at Earth Overshoot. We were more or less in balance and using the amount of resources that the Earth had. There was a reason that I had Heather play music from the 1960s, because in the 1960s, before we even had Earth Day, we were not overshooting the resources of the Earth. And as you can see over time, this has just gotten worse. Can everyone see my cursor up here? So last year, Earth Overshoot Day was on July 29th. So we're doing better this year, but it's better because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've all made dramatic changes that have changed the way that we're not driving as much, we're not flying, just our resource use has really changed. So we want to find a way to get there by planning to get there, by not getting there because of some horrible global pandemic. So in 1961, we were using about 73% of the Earth's capacity. And today, as an average, we're using 160%. So it's more than doubled. We have dramatically increased the amount of resources that we use on the Earth. So what we call this in the world of ecology, which I'm from, is an ecological footprint. So as long as humanity's been around, we've used resources because we need them for warmth, for water, you know. So we need wood to build our houses and other buildings. Wood is often used for heat. I know people tend to like fires, campfires in the summer. So wood's an important resource. We all drink water every day. We need it to stay alive. And then, you know, historically we used animals. And so I have the picture of the bison on the right, because the bison was not only used for food, but the Native Americans, they were able to use different parts of that animal. You know, the hides were used for warmth. They used parts of the tendons, you know, to construct things. So they did not waste. They really used their resources wisely. When we think about society today, we have industrial agriculture, we have huge factories. The image on the right is an oil refinery. The agriculture that we have, we do a lot of irrigation, highly water intensive. So the amount of water that we're using to water our crops is not sustainable. We're using more water than we should be. So a lot of ways that every aspect of our life, we're using more resources than we should and more resources than we really need to. So different countries around the world have different ecological footprints. So I want to orient you to this figure a little bit. The different colors represent different parts of the world. So down here at the bottom, this gray circle, that's the United States. Right next to us is Canada. Over here, this other gray circle, that's Bermuda. And then all these blue circles over here, those are all European countries. So the larger your circle, the more resources you use. If your circle is about the big as this one over here on the right, then you're more or less in balance with the resources that are available on Earth. If you're here in the middle with these tiny little circles, you're using less resources than is needed. So you're doing great in terms of that, but your quality of life may not be as good. This is another figure from the Global Footprint Network. So this is another way to look at it. The red, the pink and the red, the stronger the red color, the more resources that country is using. The green are countries that are not in debt in terms of their ecological footprints. So they have an excess of resources compared to what they're using. So that's actually a good thing. A lot of the over-resource use is due to fossil fuel use. And if you look at this graphic that shows global CO2 emissions, you can see that there's definitely similarities, that a lot of the countries that had the high amount of resource use overall also have high carbon emissions. So you can see that particularly here in North America, you know, to some extent also in Europe, their carbon emissions aren't quite as high as ours, but there are areas of overlap. And that is the area in terms of overall of reducing that overshoot is bringing down our carbon emissions would help the biggest part. Okay, so my part of the presentation is really about giving kind of the bad news here and the doom and gloom, and whereas April is going to come in and give us all some hope and solutions here. But to depress you even more, Earth Overshoot Day in the United States is March 14th, 2020. So months and months ago, we used more than our share of the Earth's resources. If you look here on the right side, I have different countries. This is also from the Global Footprint Network, this graphic, and shows how many of their countries they need to balance out with the amount of resources that they use. So we're not at the top of the list, but we're still using 2.2 United States worth of resources. And we're a big country geographically. We're probably bigger than a lot of the countries on here, with the exception of maybe China. You know, India is relatively large as well, but you're using more resources than we have. So what the US is using is the equivalent of 5 Earths a year, which is way too many. And thinking about this and about why we do this, I've been talking a lot about an item that I have that I care about that I've lost, and it's called a footprint. And it's this item right here, and it sits underneath the bottom of my tent. So it protects my tent when I'm camping and backpacking. And so I've been going without it this summer while I've been frantically looking over my house trying to figure out where it is. And I can't find it. And it's frustrating me. And finally, I've made the decision that I think it's better to go ahead and buy another footprint because it'll help my tent last longer, in the hopes that maybe I can look for another week and find the one that I have. But like most Americans, I have too much stuff. And because I have too much stuff, I'm disorganized. I don't know where that footprint is in my house. It's somewhere here. I know it's here. I know I have not given it away or left it out camping, but I've lost it. So to think about this in terms of the fact that we have too much stuff, and think about how it has created these other industries. So in the 1960s was when we first started having storage units. The first one was actually open somewhere in Florida, I read in doing the research for this presentation. And those storage units started to expand in the 1990s. And today we have nearly 50,000 storage units around the United States. And so those are filled with, you know, things that we have, that they aren't things that we necessarily need on a daily basis, otherwise they wouldn't be in a storage unit. And most of us may have difficulty finding the time to go to that storage unit and figuring out what in there do we really want, what do we really need. And it's not doing society any good just sitting there in a storage unit, whereas it looks like up here we've got a cooler. You know, somebody could use that cooler instead of going out and buying a new cooler. So it's figuring out how to take the resources that we already have that are sitting in storage units around the country and make them usable, as opposed to producing more and more resources and buying more and more footprints for your tents. When you look at housing, housing size has dramatically changed over the past less than 100 years. So the picture that I have on the left, I chose it because it has the pumpkins and the orange. It has a little bit of an autumn look to it. That's my guess, is that is probably a home from the 1920s, 1930s. And at that point in time, homes were around 1,000 square feet. So those homes, you know, there's a lot of them around in Seattle where I live. A lot of times people have made additions into them to make them bigger. But sometime after World War II is that our homes started getting bigger. So now the typical size of home is more than twice that big. And if you notice, this picture that I have on the left doesn't have a garage, whereas this picture of the home on the right has a 3-car garage. So dramatic difference in the home. So not only the resources that you need to make a home that large, but also the energy to heat that home and the resources to maintain that home. The other difference that's happened over this time period is the number of people living in these homes. So these smaller homes would have more people living in them than these typically larger homes we have here on the right side. If you look at more recent trends in housing, this is just from 1999, I found this graphic. You know, they were gradually increasing up until we had the Great Recession. But then after the Great Recession, you know, they dipped a little bit, but then they started going up again. And so the trend is that sizes are going down. However, how the pandemic is going to affect that, I don't know. I mean, more people are going to be working from home. So maybe they're going to decide they actually need a larger house because they need the space to have a comfortable home office. So thinking more about the pandemic, the pandemic has really dramatically changed things, the way that we live. You know, it's closed places that we go, and it's also affect natural areas. And there has been some talk in the literature about whether, you know, man's interaction with nature has led to this pandemic. And that's hard to say for sure from what the research I've had. But the more that you have roads going into wilderness areas and doing habitat destruction, the more problems you have with climate change is likely to lead to more diseases and more pandemics going forward. So, you know, this could be an ongoing problem that we're dealing with. So I have a quote here, and in the chat box, which I'm going to open up, I'm going to ask you to give me some information about it. You know, what year do you think this is from, or what decade do you think this is from? Who do you think said it? Where do you think said it? Where do you think they said it? If you have any clues about what this is before I reveal the author of this quote. So you can type in while I'm reading. Too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product now is over $8 billion a year, but that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet, the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. Okay, someone is guessing JFK. Any other guesses in there? Okay, I'll give a hint. So it is a quote from the 1960s. It's not JFK. It is a quote from the 1960s. Any other guesses? Martin Luther King? No, it's not Martin Luther King. I'm trying to get my slide advanced to reveal the answer. So you can keep guessing while I'm trying to get my slide to advance. Rachel Carson. So it's not JFK, it's his brother. And one of the reasons I like this quote is that he said this at a time he announced his candidacy for president of the United States. And he made this speech in Lawrence, Kansas, at University of Kansas. And it turns out I'm from Kansas. So it's very near where I grew up. I went to University of Kansas briefly after I graduated from high school. And so I'm been thinking more about this because he also talks about the destruction of the redwoods, you know, damage to the Great Lakes. He talks a lot about the environment in this speech. And so I'm going to ask around and see if I can find somebody who attended this. It's not impossible because I have relatives that went to the University of Kansas. I don't know of anybody that was there during that time. The speech was made in March of 1968 when he announced his candidacy. I'm still not advancing. Heather? Okay, there we go. All right, so another quote. This one is from JFK. Our problems are made by people. The part in bold is that I've rephrased it for more politically correct modern times. Therefore, they can be solved by people, and people can be as big as they want. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Our reason and spirit have often solved that seemingly unsolvable, and we believe that we can do it again. So the idea that, you know, the problems that we're dealing with today, and even though the problems we had in the 1960s are very different, you know, the problems that we had in the 60s, we found out a way to solve them. And so that makes me hopeful that the problems that we are having right now can be solved as well. Another quote that both JFK and there's also a version from his brother, Robert Kennedy, the problems in the world cannot be solved by skeptics or cynics whose horizons are limited by the obvious realities. We need people who can dream of things that never were. So on the left side here, I have a solar installation, but this just isn't a solar installation. It is also a research area where they're trying to grow crops underneath the solar panels. So doing a dual use of that land and trying to come up with solutions that deal with two problems at the same time. So creating energy there, that energy could also be used right on site to help with the irrigation of these crops. So making our land use really innovative. On the right side now, I have a graphic from a paper that came out this month that looks at our fossil fuel emissions and how they've changed with the pandemic. So what these researchers think have happened is that we've had a bit of a blip this year because of us working from home, not traveling as much, and that we're probably on this blue line trajectory, which is getting us a little bit better. But unless we stay doing the behaviors that we are, we're going to go back to this gold line trajectory. And that's not where we want to be, because it's going to put us in a place where human life, you know, the ability to live on this planet and be comfortable by the end of the century is not going to be good. So what we want to do is to get on a green trajectory where we are using less and less emissions as we move forward each year. So I think there's definite hope. I mean, the youth movement, you know, I think there's lots of ways that we can get there, and there's no reason why we can't start now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that April can get hers up. And while she's doing that, I will look at the chat and see if there's any questions that I can ask quickly.
April, make sure that you unmute yourself. And Patricia, Kathy Kindler had a question. What was the gap in the dark green trajectory? Can't say that word today. But what was the gap?
Oh, on the graph that I just showed?
Yes, please.
Ooh, I'm probably going to have to go back at the end and look at that.
Okay.
To be able to answer that question. So hang on, I will get to that.
Thank you. And then April, if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself and just whenever you're ready.
Great. So hello, welcome, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, excellent. So I teach marketing and sustainable business at Seattle University. I've been thinking about this stuff for a really long time. I'm in my 12th year at Seattle U. Before that, I spent many years at University of Washington, and was actually teaching an environmental marketing class way back in the 1990s, which they called the Decade of the Environment. Those of us old enough to remember might recall. It was Time Magazine's story in 1990, Decade of the Environment. So sometimes I think we've come a long way, and sometimes I'm not so sure. So I teach, and I spend a lot of time thinking about consumer behavior and consumer psychology. That's really the approach that I take to thinking about marketing. And so I combine that with sustainable business ideas in thinking about these two questions. So Patricia and I talked and said, you know, it'd be good to talk about why. Why do we consume so much? And then what can we do to change? So I've got a few ideas about what we can do to change as well. Let's see how we... there we go. Okay, so first of all, why do we buy so much? There are so many reasons. And this is the beauty of teaching marketing or consumer psychology, right? We all are part of it. We're all part of we're all affected by marketing. We're all consumers. We all make these decisions. And so we all have experiences that are going to be relevant today. So a lot of this stuff I think will not be, I mean, it's not like news. It's just putting it together in a different way, maybe. Trying to make the grid bigger, but I can't. So I can't see everybody at the same time. That's okay. Okay, so why we buy so much? It's worthwhile thinking about all the different kinds of influences that are at work on consumers in any decision that we make, and then we can think about you know, how it might encourage us to buy or to buy more. So we'll kind of work our way around the circle here one by one. So first of all, personal values and motives and attitudes. We buy things to impress other people. We buy things for the social badge value. We buy things, I mean, in terms of personal values, right? So sometimes it's a matter of, you know, I can buy it because it's cheap and it makes me happy in the short term. In terms of motives or motivations, or maybe, you know, it's kind of the keeping the others who might see us or who might judge us or who might think about us or form an opinion about us because of the things that we buy. I think it's super ironic. I love the picture in the middle of these shirts, right? That say we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. And of course, those are on t-shirts that you can buy. It's like, oh, really? How ironic, right? So I included the quote about the purses because so many of my undergraduate students, I just hadn't realized just how big a status symbol these incredibly expensive purses were. I had students with purses that I've never even touched purses that cost that much, let alone bought them and used them. But yeah, why does somebody have so many shoes, right? And it may, I mean, there's a whole variety of different personal reasons why it may make sense, or why it might be convenient, or why it might be fun, or why it might not be thought of as being a problem in any way, to go ahead and buy that extra item or that one more, whatever it is. In terms of personal values, there also are people who are interested in buying less or in creating less waste. You know, the whole zero waste, Heather's on the call too, right? So the whole zero waste movement, right, is huge, is growing in size. I shouldn't say it's huge because a lot of people still aren't there. What's ironic, again, is all the different products out there that you can buy to help you go zero waste, to help you essentially buy less, right? So there's websites and there's all sorts of articles and there's all sorts of lifestyle guidance about how to pursue a zero waste lifestyle or a less wasteful lifestyle. I think the headline in the bottom right here, will consumers decide that buying less is better than buying green? That hits a little closer to the crux of the problem, right? That our system, our business system of business as it's set up is built on selling people stuff. And so it's dangerous. Businesses may feel that it's, you know, sort of dangerous territory to think about encouraging people to buy less, because then they'll be selling less and then they'll make less profit. And so that's kind of a glimpse into a recurring theme, which is going to be, there's some bigger system problems here, some bigger system influences at work that are resulting in the kind of consumption levels that we have. Individual choices, yes, but also bigger system kinds of the way the systems are set up. Also, another influence is other people. So other people can influence us, and we can see other people. Used to be we could see other people at work. Now we see them on screen at work, and we see other people in our neighborhood. We can see what they have, what they eat, what they wear, what they use, what they love, what products they enjoy. And there's a lot of interpersonal influence that goes on in all of our decisions, but in buying decisions included in that. And then there's, I think of that as direct influence, right? People that we know. And then there's kind of the indirect influence of other people that comes through social media. And so Instagram and Facebook, and then Pinterest to some extent, Snapchat to some extent, TikTok to some extent these days. Especially among younger people, the online social influencers are huge, just huge. And a lot of young people are aware of it. And still they resolutely follow the influencers that they think are really cool or have some sorts of insights that they don't have. So there's a lot of influence that's going on, even by people that we don't know. Also, another influence is what I call internal influence. I'm thinking sort of memories or emotions, maybe attitudes as well, deeply held attitudes. This might intersect a little bit with the values one, too. But for a lot of us, a lot of product category groups, right? Sometimes we buy or we have or we keep stuff, not for the stuff itself, but for the emotional connections that the stuff represents or the memories that that stuff might be connected to. And there are lots of, I included a model diagram here in the middle. There's lots of research about, you know, kind of why do people keep stuff? Why do we have all these storage units, right? Filled with stuff. Clearly people aren't using that stuff. Why can't they get rid of it? And we're not even talking about the hoarders, the extreme end of, you know, we've seen those programs, right? But pretty much most of us have things that we might have that we probably don't use those, or we don't need those, but we hang on to this stuff. It's part of the stuff that we end up living with in our household because of emotional connections. So that's just kind of an added challenge to try and get someone to give that up. But the connection could feel broken or lost. Other influences are messages from the government and messages in our culture. Let's do culture first. That's the left side of the picture. There are cultural messages that we are surrounded by that we often don't even notice. I mean, we don't think about it until sometimes it's called out. So there's a group out of Vancouver, BC called Adbusters that has been around for years and years now, and they make fun of, essentially, you know, make fun of the advertising that we see in our culture by doing something like this Coca-Cola style billboard, helping people to realize just how much advertising, how many messages we're exposed to pretty at such a widespread level. And so widespread that we don't even realize it. It's kind of, you know, the air that we breathe. We don't stop and think about it very often. It does get talked about. So there are segments, sort of segments of the population that are aware of it, that are concerned about it, that are trying to think about it and trying to make changes. But again, the system is set up so that, you know, advertising surrounds us and it's just there. That's part of our commercial culture. Messages from the government, GDP we've already heard about, that is the standard way of measuring success, right? And national success. And when the GDP goes down, it's like cause for a huge alarm in the news. We hear about it. Currently, we're hearing about GDP and economic status pretty much on a daily basis. There are there's new data and new trends to talk about. Those of us who are old enough to remember after 9/11, when the president made this big, you know, televised address to the nation, what he said was, you know, what you can do for your country is go shopping. And a whole lot of us, our mouths just dropped open. It's like, really? That's what we need to do? As Patricia's slide pointed out, you know, GDP measures everything. It measures economic activity. And it doesn't distinguish between good economic activity and bad economic activity. So, you know, cleanup of oil spills, that boosts the GDP. And selling air pollution abatement equipment, that boosts GDP as well. I mean, everything. Oh my goodness, all the equipment, all the PPE, all the stuff that we've needed to try and address the pandemic, that's selling more stuff, that boosts the economy. According to GDP. So that's a problem. But it's a dominant message that we're exposed to. Other influences are from marketing companies, marketing activities that companies engage in. So I teach marketing to undergraduate students, introduce them to what marketing is. And, you know, through offering products, there are positives that companies are able to affect in society and for consumers, right? So they offer products that are better than the ones that were around before, that do a better job of meeting consumer needs. Sometimes a positive is held that, you know, that marketers work to increase the number of choices available, increase variety for consumers, increase the standard of living, there again, usually as measured by GDP. And there's negatives too, on the left, all the red things, the red little ovals in the diagram, as well as the additional red problems on the left margin. Encouraging consumption, well, you know, some, like GDP folks, think encouraging consumption is a great thing, but in terms of resource use, definitely not. In terms of environmental impacts, definitely not. And kind of the commercial culture that we're surrounded by, it affects that as well. I put that in the red column because I don't think that's a good thing. In terms of making more choices available, I just love the picture on the left, right? How many of us have not felt like that at some point in some store? We go in and it's like, oh my goodness, there's just way too many choices for me to even have to think about. I feel like my head's going to explode, or I just don't even want to think about it, right? Paint choices. Have you bought paint ever? Oh my goodness. How do you know, there's just a million and one, it feels like. The book that I included a book here, The Paradox of Choice, excellent book. A researcher from Swarthmore wrote the book about, but he starts it, I mean, really memorable for me, called The Paradox of Choice. He starts off by saying, and that was when that book was published, which is not in the last 5 years. The typical consumer, when you go into a grocery store, remember back when we went into grocery stores, and you go down the cereal aisle, you have on average 126 different choices of cereal. Oh, it's overload, and it's mental overload as well. We don't have the mental bandwidth and the energy to really be able to handle that very well. And not just an increase of stress is found when people are confronted with an abundance of choices. But he documents a lot of research that shows that people make worse decisions, not just the same quality decisions, but worse decisions. So they feel more stressed and they're making worse choices. So this goes in the category of negative impacts of marketing activity, for sure. Messages are everywhere. This is the other big complaint that we have about marketing, right? It's like, oh, there's advertising everywhere and spam calls on your phone. And on the right side, we see, isn't that a cool billboard though? That looks like the Hot Wheels track. That's a billboard for Hot Wheels on a freeway. Oh, clever. But the bottom right is more typical, right? When we think about, oh, just the clutter and the overabundance of advertising. It's like everywhere, and we don't always want to see it. It's not always attractive. The big infographic in the middle here I included because related to, why do I keep getting spam calls on my phone, or I get, ads that I don't want in my social media feeds. Those numbers there include how many people are on each of those platforms. And it's millions and millions and millions of people. And so, of course, companies are going to go there. Of course they are. That's how our system is set up. If the companies didn't go there, they wouldn't be doing their job as a business, right? So we're kind of, again, it's a system level, there's system level problems here too that are causing. More recent thinking about and teaching about marketing and kind of the field of marketing does include this societal marketing concept, which clearly identifies society as a stakeholder in how business and marketing does its business. So this at least is a conceptual approach that is becoming more widespread. I'm encouraged because all the people who go through training in a business school and take marketing classes, they hear about this. Not to say this is widespread at this point, but at least we're planting seeds now for the shift that's going to have to take place. So in terms of why we buy so much, there's all those influences and all those reasons, some of which are internal and a lot of which are external, actually, a lot of pressures that we may not realize. Okay, so trying to shift toward more positives, right? So what can we do about this? How can we change? And I've got a bunch of different kinds of ideas about this that go from the really big down to the micro level. So at the macro or system level, there's some things that can change. And then we'll finish by talking about some things that can happen at the individual level. So at the macro level, GDP is a problem. It is a huge problem. This is like the score that we use to keep track, right? And this is what all the accounting practices are built on, measuring GDP. And we know that GDP is not a very imperfect kind of measure. It doesn't reflect well-being of society. It reflects one little slice, the economy, how active is the economy. There are places where the model on the right, gross national happiness, is a measure that has been developed and is being used to assess the well-being of a country or a community or a state or a province. Great Britain signed on to this, and they haven't discarded GDP, but they've added additional measures. So they have a more well-rounded sense of, we're doing really well here, but our people are suffering in maybe these other areas. Gross national happiness was first adopted and put into use in the country of Bhutan by a teenage king who said, I'm interested in encouraging the happiness of my people. And so they worked on measures, and so they do use these measures. And their economic status is not, tops in the world, but they do well, and they're keeping track of all of these other kinds of dimensions as well. So changing how we measure things at a business system level is that's a big challenge, a system level challenge, but is needed. In terms of changes that are happening, I'm really curious to see what happens sort of as we move out of this COVID experience. We don't know exactly how long that will be, but there are, in terms of thinking about well-being in a more multidimensional way, there's been a real change and an emerging sense of acknowledging the importance of families and family time and communications and friends and connections and interactions with people, and spending time in nature. I mean, so there are some big themes that have emerged in how people's lives have shifted. So I find that a little encouraging that some of those lifestyle changes we've been forced to make might stay with us, at least to some extent, as we move forward. So again, moving away from only economic measures to a broader sense of what well-being is. Another thing to consider is to change the emphasis, change the way we frame thinking about products from ownership, possession of products, to focusing on what are the benefits that we're really needing. And so at a consumer level, we can think about cars, right? Used to be everybody thought they had to have a car, but then there was like, well, we could lease cars. We don't have to own them. We could lease them. And then at the end of our 3 years, we turn it back. And then the car could be used by someone else. Or we could hire a car, hire a driver, or we could use a taxi. Or now there's, you know, all the Uber and the ride-hailing services. Thinking about the full cost of ownership makes a lot of people realize that, you know, maybe owning the product isn't really what I want. I just want to be able to go these sorts of places at these times. And maybe there's cheaper, easier ways to do that than having to own this car and maintain the car and pay insurance on the car and all of that. This kind of thinking, this focus on benefits rather than the product itself, I first learned about this sort of shift in an industrial setting, and it was about companies that were building tall buildings, like building an office building someplace. And it used to be that the owners who are building this new building would buy elevators. So they'd have to buy an elevator, have it installed, and then they have to keep it up. And what do you do if it breaks down? You have to bring people in to repair it. And it was responsibility of the building owner to take care of that. And then a shift has happened with some building owners to say, you know, we would like elevator service to be provided in our building. So, and they've negotiated with elevator companies. So the company now will install an elevator, but the elevator company maintains the elevator and they keep it running. And what's great, what's just beautiful about this is that it shifts the incentives so that they're more aligned, so that the elevator company now has an incentive to build an elevator that's going to last a really long time, very durable, where if you're selling it, you want somebody to have to buy it again and again, right? So it doesn't have to last a long time. But if you're maintaining it yourself, and they make it easy to fix, because they're the ones who are going to be called on to repair it and maintain it. So this aligning of incentives, I mean, it cuts down on resource use, it cuts down on waste. It's really, I think, a really, really powerful idea that could be put to use in a lot of places. So remember elevators. Remember that, yeah, that shifting of whose responsibility and what do you really want? You want the service of getting people between floors. Maybe you don't care so much about, you know, exactly how it happens. These days, thinking about products as a service rather than physical products is widespread and growing, right? Anybody who uses Netflix, you know, you don't have to have DVDs anymore. You just dial it up on Netflix. You don't have to have CDs anymore. It's available on your Apple Music account, right? And especially young people, it's like they don't even think it's really old school to have, you know, CDs or DVDs or LPs, you know, super old. But lowering resource use is part of the impact of focusing on the service aspect rather than the physical product aspect of a business. And that kind of sort of leads into this notion of sharing economy. We hear a lot about, the sharing economy and ride sharing, right, is the biggest way we've seen this talked about. But it is sharing resource, making resource use more of, I don't know if I can go back. I touched the wrong pad here. Making resource use more efficient so that an item is used by many people rather than just one person. And there's been a lot of writing recently about the sharing economy. It's worth thinking about. But really, you know, we're using a lot of those already and increasing, and things like Instacart, right, has just exploded during this pandemic situation where people need to shop somehow. sorry, here we go. Circular economy is another phrase that we hear a lot. And I included the diagram on the left because a lot of people think circular economy, oh, that's recycling. And you know, the triangle chasing arrows, it's kind of like a circular diagram about recycling. That's really not what we mean by circular economy though. Recycling just kind of means that things cycle back a couple times and they still end up as waste eventually. And these days with the problem with China and all, you know, the recycling controversies and the recycling regulations, more and more of what we think is being recycled actually doesn't ever get made into anything else, let alone being made into something else that could be used. So the circular economy really is keeping waste and eliminating waste, keeping our resources in use. So we make something, we use it, we reuse it, we remake it into something else, we take those resources and cycle them into making something else. So the true circular economy is very much focused away from waste. The diagram on the left here, I included because, at least in sustainable business talk, the take, make, waste kind of model is the traditional model. Linear, you get the resources, you make your stuff, you use the products, and then you throw them away. It's a kind of a one-way ticket through. And that's what we're moving away from, trying to move away from, slowly moving away from. The circular economy, I included the diagram on the right here because it's pretty, but also it includes a lot of the benefits, right? To reuse of resources and reducing dependency on resource extraction. Collecting at the end of life and remanufacturing and recycling is part of this. Circular economy, I'm not to say that recycling isn't there at all, but recycling has its own big set of problems. Like anybody who's tried to figure out where does this package go once I'm done with it? How do I get rid of it? What are the materials in it? What's it made of? Does it come apart? Can it be recycled? Which bin is it supposed to go in? And how do we know? Who has the bandwidth to figure it out for all the stuff that we have to deal with? I would say nobody. So the responsibility has landed on the consumer to try and figure out how to put these things into the right bins, where they should go. And I don't know, every time I find myself digging a plastic sticker off my banana peel and I can't get it off because it's stuck on there too hard, I'm just angry because it's like, I shouldn't have to be doing this. The system needs to work better. So there again, we get back to kind of a system level problem. So system level problems take a long time to shift. There are shifts going on, and so many organizations, including Zero Waste Washington, is making good progress and applying pressure in places to make things happen. So that's encouraging. But what can one person do? So getting to the very individual level, so what can we do? Well, one person can make decisions differently, right? So there's a couple of these pyramids that provide ideas. So starting with using what you have is a good place to start. Like make buying something the last resort rather than the first easy kind of action to take. Amazon would not like to hear me say this, right? Because one-stop shopping, one-click shopping makes it so easy. And a lot of people have realized that they've fallen into this trap of it's just so easy. But, you know, borrowing, repairing things when they break or don't work well, swapping with somebody, engaging with buy nothing groups that are neighborhood level groups, where something you don't need, somebody else does. And there's an active swapping and community building going on, as well as, you know, buying from thrift stores or thrift sites online, maybe making it rather than, if you can't do any of those other things, then buying it might have to happen. This different diagram starts at the top and goes down to the bottom. But in terms of gift giving, but also, you know, it's a good way to think about buying. What are we buying? How can we buy things that are less resource intensive? And so there are lots of options. It does require us to think about it though. When you do have to buy something that'll last, so you don't have to buy it again. And there's lots of places online that can help you do this. They'll sell you stuff. But some of these things are like lifetime purchases. So you buy a cast iron slow cooker and or pot, and it can last for your lifetime. You can pass it down even to children. So there can be things that we can buy for a lifetime, and maybe, you know, if you go to thrift stores, you may find some of these lifetime kinds of objects that somebody decided they didn't like anymore, and you can get it there. Even buying a product, so the choices of buying a product that will last a long time still doesn't address all the problems, all the issues. And so there's this clothespin paradox, not just clothespins, but lots of other products. So as I sort of read through part of this, you can think about, have you ever thought about, this person says, when they looked a bit closer without much imagination at all, I could see birch trees growing in a forest, gathering sun, having a life, when all of a sudden everything shifted. Trees were cut down, rolled through a mill, turned into 1,000,000 3-inch pinchers with precise quality controlled diameters, lengths, weights, and future function. And on the other side of the planet, iron ore is being blasted out of the ground, melted, extruded, formed into wire, eventually twisted into springs that were shipped halfway around the world to the factory where they could be joined with the wood to make the clothespins, and then shipped around the world to the people who would eventually use the clothespins. Also thinking about the workers who are also having a life, being paid pennies a day in many places to run the machines or to hand count the clothespins or to package them up for us. And, you know, the person ends by feeling guilty because, you know, good environmental stewards and penny pinchers could pin up their clothes in the sun rather than use the clothes dryer, right? And if we think about any of the products that we use in our everyday life, each one has gone through the supply chain of just unimaginable complexity. Ingredients from around the world, travel from around the world, and using all sorts of different people who are working in different labor conditions. So now I say, who has the bandwidth to think about all that too? That's just overwhelming. So there is one thing that, I mean, as a starting point, if you have seen this on a package, certified B Corporation, these companies are good. Their focus is using business as a force for good. They have devoted themselves to working on balancing purpose and profit. They are audited. They provide tons of data. There's a lot of transparency in the whole process. You can look any of them up. You can go to the B Corporation's website and find out about any of the companies that have been certified as B Corps. They not only are interested in making a profit, but they consciously decide that they're going to work on providing benefit in environmental ways and or social, societal ways as being an organization that's operating in the world. So these companies are good, and it's kind of like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, but from a sustainability perspective. So it is kind of a mental shortcut that we can, you know, if you're thinking about a product choice, well, if you see the B Corp symbol on the product, oh, that may be something that could, you know, kind of be an easy clue that this was probably a better company to invest in. You know, currently there's 3,499 companies worldwide. So it's not a small movement, it's a big movement and growing day by day. More and more companies are joining the B Corporation community is what they call it. So I've said a lot about system level problems. You know, there are individual actions we can take. And at the big level, we know there are big issues, big shifts that need to happen too. More conscious buying on the part of consumers requires more effort on the part of consumers, and we can't do it all at once. And so we don't need to beat ourselves up about it, but we can decide that we're going to start. So you start with one product or one decision, start where you can, get that routinized, and then expand to pick another kind of product or decision that you're making to shift over time. And then you can also work at the system level to try and, you know, apply pressure to organizations and governments to make changes as well. I really like the Maya Angelou quote about, I did then what I knew how to do, but now that I know better, I do better. So it's not a guilt trip, but it's a, we can do better, and we can choose to do better. So thanks for your attention. Sorry I went so long.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Did you want to mention?
Resource list is
Yes.
here. Yeah.
You want to highlight any of those? And does anyone have any questions for either Dr. Townsend or Dr. Atwood? Oh, yes. So we have a poll. If you can fill it out, just go ahead. Did you know about Earth Overshoot Day before this webinar? You can pick yes, somewhat, no, unsure, or don't recall. How much would you say you learned this evening? Wonderful. Looks like a lot of you learned a lot. And are you willing to share what you learned tonight with others, and do you plan to? So thank you for taking that. We have like 30 more seconds on the poll. And I just want to mention, thank you, Dr. Atwood, for bringing up all those wonderful examples of sharing economy, and also the, oh no, I've forgotten the word for it, but the circular economy. What's perfect about that is our next sustainability speaker, Jolene Jang, who's on the call with us tonight, will be talking about upcycling and really, like, once we have all this stuff, if we can't find someone that has a use for it, what do we do with it? Because there is no away, right? When you throw something away, it doesn't just go away, it goes somewhere. So if you can rethink about what you have and what you can do with it differently, that's a great solution. I'm going to end the polling in like just 30 more seconds here. The other thing I wanted to say is we also offer repair cafes. Right now we're doing a pilot with kind of a porch pickup, coordinating with the HopeWorks community at the end of this month. And assuming that goes well, we'll be hosting 2 repair cafes in the fall, so keep an eye out for those. And I just want to say thank you again, everybody, for coming. I'm going to end the polling now. And if you have any questions, I would love to hear from you. heather.tgarden@wsu.edu is my email. And like I said, I'll be sending an email out tomorrow with the recording. And thank you very much. And let's see, Barry said, hi Barry, Barry's from 21 Acres. Last time I bought socks, I Googled labor conditions in the 2 or 3 countries where they came from and chose the best one. Felt a little silly, but satisfying. That's awesome. Thank you, Barry, for doing that. That's terrific. Yeah, there's so many things to think about. And one of the things, I used to be, I love recycling. But one of the things I saw today at the zoo, I just have to share for a second. Let me see if I can get to it. Was this lady's reusable bag. And Heather Trim, if you're still on the call, I think that you'll appreciate it. Let me see here if I can. April, I'm going to override your sharing, but it said, recycle or die. And I thought that was a bit extreme. She said she bought it in Berlin, but
that is totally extreme.
That's awesome.
It's like, that's a lot of pressure.
Actually, I heard someone say the other day in California, and I think this is what we want for Washington. If the manufacturer can't make the item be able to be either reused, recycled, or compost, then they should not be sending, it should die. The product should die in Washington State. So yes. I kind of agree with this, except that I want the reuse and the compost, or just, not even have it in the first place. Right. That is great. I'm gonna take a photo of it.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again, everybody. And I just, let's see here. How do I get back to where, there I am.
Another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's see, you just mentioned that someone said they looked up the labor issues. So the suggestion here is to go to Certified B, is that what it's called? If you want to know where our socks come from. And is there another source we should also go to so we could really get a sense of, what went into it? Is there another website?
Well, I was going to say, if they're a certified B corporation, So bcorporation.net is the website for those. And you can find out information about companies that are certified B Corps. Oftentimes companies who are doing good, who are doing better at their production processes, or they're actually actively thinking about these things, they'll talk about it in their website, or kind of in their communications. They sort of talk about how much better they do. So you can go to company websites, and if they're doing good, they usually will talk about it, and you don't have to like dig too far into their website to try and find it. Mm-hmm. Patagonia is just a classic example of a company that has been dedicated to this since it's part of the DNA of that company. It really is how they think about doing business. And they were among the first that they provide not just, this product is made in this country, but they provide the street address of the factory where specific parts of the product are made, which at the time was unheard of. Other apparel manufacturers were like, no, that's like trade secret. We don't want to let anybody else know where we're making the stuff. And Patagonia was putting it right out there and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. They've also been, I really admire them and use them as a kind of a role model example, right? Because they've been really good at saying, we're not perfect. Here's what we're doing. Here's where we know we still need to improve, or here are the changes that we're making to try to be better. So I really value the transparency of companies because there's no way to be perfect. It's just stuff is getting shipped around the world, it's all has its impact, its footprint. But companies that will provide the information, and not just at a sort of high level, very general, but they'll get specific about it. Mm-hmm. I admire somebody who would do the research about socks. That's awesome. And if you found something that you like, then you can buy from them again. That decision is like done. You don't have to redo it every time you make the choice, because it takes a lot of effort.
Right.
I was going to ask April if she had one more model example, because that's fascinating.
Model example? How many companies, right? So I'll just tell a story. Recently, I bought a water bottle, and it's double walled. An ad came up on my social media feed, and I was like, oh, that looks really great. And they talked about, so I went to their website, and there was really good story detail provided about how the company got started. It's a small company, the entrepreneur started it, and very customer oriented in terms of the benefits that the product featured. And the water bottles are made out of metal, so they don't break and they don't have any of the plastic problems. But they didn't say anything about sourcing at all. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote to them and I said, hey, I really like the looks of your water bottles, but on your website, it doesn't say anything about where they're manufactured. They're designed in Colorado, but where are they manufactured? And what sorts of labor practices, or, what kind of sourcing issues have you thought about? And I haven't heard from them yet. So it's like, that's not a model example, but it's an example that's more realistic. A lot of companies, if they have any one thing that they're good at, they like to trumpet that. But that doesn't mean that they've thought very carefully about all the different aspects. There are a couple different sock companies that I really like. There's an alpaca fiber. They make socks and sweaters and stuff called Paka, P-A-K-A. That when I looked at their website, I was really impressed with the detail that they provided about who's it made by and how is it made. And, Icebreaker is another one. They make wool clothing, merino wool. And they used to have in each of their garments, they used to have a tag, like a tag in the back, along the side seam or something, that had what they called a BAA code, B-A-A code, not a barcode, but it had a number on it. And so you could go on the website and track down which sheep ranch in New Zealand the wool came from. It's like, wow, that's really cool. They stopped doing that. I'm not sure why. They may have gotten too big to be able to do that very effectively or something. I don't know. So there was a question that came up about buying local versus not local. And yeah, in terms of footprints, right? The carbon emissions kind of footprint, buying local is so much better. And there's so many things that we can't get locally that just aren't made locally. So
Yep.
it's been really interesting to watch the masks, that everybody needs, right? And all the companies that have shifted to making masks, and a lot of those are locally produced. And even a lot of the big local manufacturers like Outdoor Research that makes outdoor clothing. Well, now they make masks too. So you can get these like, highly, not technical design, but more than just, the Liberty bottles is a good example as well. So there's a lot of, looking local first is a great strategy.
Cuts those carbon emissions, right? Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. Is there any other questions or comments that people want to share before we sign off for the night? And if you do, remember to unmute yourself.
Heather, I looked at the graph. I think it was Kathy Kindler that had a question of, and I don't know the answer to that, why it's kind of faded like that. I'd have to go back to the research article. So I don't know. Sorry.
All right. Well, thanks everyone again. So our next speaker series event is happening on Wednesday, September 16th. And Jolene, that is fashioning her mask right now, hello, will be our speaker for that, and very excited. She has a lot of resourceful ideas and that I think will either inspire you or spark other creativity of your own. So it's a great idea that once you, like I said earlier, once you have this stuff, rather than getting rid of it, what can you do with it and make it useful again? Just like they used to do on the farms in the old days, right? So we're kind of going back to old ways, and it's kind of fun that way. So thank you again, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. And thank you again to Dr. Atwood and Dr. Townsend. And I'll see you hopefully online again soon. Okay, good night, everyone. Bye.
So Patricia and Heather, are we done? Is there anything we need to do?
1 second. I was just gonna bye, Nancy. I'm logging you out. Bye, Betty. I'll call you later. Jolene, there's just the four of us now. Did you have anything you wanted to say before we go, or you good?
No.
Okay.
I was taking a screenshot of you. Okay.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Okay, bye. Unless you're going to point out something that doesn't look good. All right. Yeah. What do you guys think? I think it was great. I didn't look at the, hopefully the poll is recorded. It probably is, right? That's my first time doing that. Patricia, did you push that out? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I don't know where they go once you, I don't know. Let's see. If I click on polls, yeah, there's the results.
Okay, good.
Oh, I can see it too.
I'm gonna, you know what?